So my name is Eric Charlesworth. I am a solutions architect with Cisco's global data center and cloud strategy and architecture team. A little bit of a mouthful. And this is my partner here, Bill Dufresne.
I have a much shorter title. My name is Bill Dufresne. I'm a distinguished systems engineer with Cisco.
And today we're going to go through the typical journey that a customer takes to get to hybrid cloud. So multi-cloud. It's complex, right? I think we all recognize that. You are talking multiple public clouds, you're talking your typical private cloud environment, but that all now is also extending into the campus and branch environments as well. So multi-cloud adoption. When we talk about multi-cloud adoption, what are we talking about? So we have a range of adoption here. So starting with ad hoc, which is really kind of look at it as customers that are experimenting with cloud, right? They are it's being driven by immediate or urgent needs. They typically are doing things that aren't approved by their IT organization. So it's very random. There's no control. There's no governance around that. All the way over to optimized, and optimized is typically the cloud adopters there. They're centrally managed. They have processes in place. They've well-defined cloud strategy, right? They are providing IT products and services to their consumers. They're doing it both from an internal as well as external providers. And typically we find that, well, I shouldn't say typically, we do find that the optimized adopters are the ones that are successful with cloud. Now, unfortunately, of all of the cloud adopters, we found that only 11% of those are optimized today.
When you talk cloud with a customer, at least what we found in dealing with our customers around the globe, they have this grand vision. They have this grand vision of ease of connectivity between clouds, able to consume different services very simply, green rolling fields of nothing but cash because they're saving money, or they're able to develop something that's going to bring more opportunity to their business. They also look at the aspect of cloud's pretty simple. The cloud providers make it very easy for you to consume their capabilities. Just swipe a credit card. It's really simple. Our developers do it all the time. So this is their cloud vision. Here's the reality of what they actually experience. They find out very quickly that there are no integrated tools between the cloud providers, and that can even include their own on-prem private cloud. They find out that their costs are not what they expected. The idea that public cloud is automatically cheaper than running something on-prem is not true across the board. The idea about security of the data and the workloads in that public cloud make them very nervous. And in essence, it adds a much higher administrative burden to their staff. They have a lot of concerns about how they scale effectively, not just the services, but how their staff actually implements it and provides those services to the consumers of it. And ultimately, they end up extricating themselves, out of the public cloud, and that's not what we want. Public cloud is good, but it has to be a mixture. So it truly has to be hybrid cloud. Very few customers out there that are early cloud adopters use a single cloud option. They use multiple clouds. Essence, multi-cloud. Multi-cloud is not just on-prem and public cloud. It could be multiple public cloud providers. So what we find that they really need, they need a process. They think they can do this, to Eric's earlier point, very ad hoc. It doesn't seem to work. They need external advice. They don't really understand the intricacies of the individual cloud providers, trying to blend them together, trying to provide an actual service to their consumers based on what they're going to consume from the public cloud or place there and what they have on their own prem and their own private cloud, perhaps. And they need governance around it. They need a driving force. The driving force might be business capabilities. The driving force might be an overall edict from the board or from a CIO level or CEO level. We must have a cloud presence. But what is that governance that drives it? And the other side of that governance, they need feedback and measurement to say, are we being successful? Just because I've deployed something into the environment doesn't guarantee its success. So as Eric mentioned, adopting multi-cloud is a daunting task. We have customers that look at, I've developed a cloud application, how do I then manage it? I like to use the analogy of it's like a cute little pet that you get, a nice little kitten or a little dog, whichever type person you are, that eventually grows into an adult of itself. It was cute and easy to manage when it was small, but the larger it grows, the care and feeding grows, the maintenance grows, and can you do that effectively in that environment? This is some of the things that the IT customers struggle with. How to build and manage that overall hybrid cloud. Because again, the capabilities and the tool sets don't match up. They don't mesh very well. It puts the human being right in the center of it. One of the things we're seeing across all customers is they're struggling to gain things like automation and orchestration because they need to move faster. The main driving factor there is, hi, my name's Bill. I'm a human and I make mistakes, right? We all make mistakes. Automation tends to drive those things out of it. So having to deal with that in a hybrid environment with different tools is very difficult. They also struggle with migrating their applications out to the public cloud. I'll give you, for instance, in just a minute of a customer experience I had that was very telling. Worked with the actual customer lead architect, and the outcome of it really was very eye-opening for that particular customer. And lastly, they're looking at how the applications are being refactored or new applications being developed, how they're actually being disaggregated from the way applications had been built and deployed in the past, and the requirements that's bringing into the environment in terms of responsiveness, mitigating latencies, et cetera. So literally connecting their direct locations directly into the public cloud to ensure that that application experience is optimal for their consumers. So they want to connect their branches and campuses in different locations directly into the public cloud. They haven't had to deal with that before.
So to build on what Bill was saying, so some customers are also looking, when they're looking to go to public cloud, they don't necessarily want to connect directly themselves. They don't want to expose their data center to the internet. Maybe they have an air gap requirement of some sort, or they have some sort of security compliance concern. So they'll use co-location facilities to provide that on-ramp. And most co-location facilities have that dedicated link to providers such as AWS or Google. So they're not being exposed. So it's just an extra layer of security. Or it could be a situation where they actually want to move their data center. So they're moving into this co-location facility. So they're actually establishing their data center and private cloud in the co-location facility, pardon me, and then going from there into the public cloud environment, right? They could be also looking, how do I optimize my SaaS environment? How do I ensure security? How do I ensure access? Who is accessing my SaaS applications? How do I control that? Those sorts of things. So we need to, provide security and control around that. How do I ensure that I have secure connectivity into that environment? And then finally, maybe, I have a customer that is looking to burst an application into the cloud. So what do I mean by that? Maybe it's a seasonal situation where I have so much capacity, but during the holidays, I need to burst into a cloud or into some sort of environment to gain additional capacity that I don't have to pay for during an off time. So Cisco's multi-cloud approach, what we've done is we've created these pillars, right? So we have our cloud advisory, which is really around the planning, helping a customer understand what are their requirements, what are their challenges, help them identify who are their end users, what's their customer, what are their goals, what's their vision. Moving into Cloud Connect, so bringing in a set of products to help a customer get a start on what products can I use to connect to public cloud environments, to ensure that the level of connectivity that I need in a way that I understand. Cloud Protect, protecting not only my private cloud environment, but my public cloud environment. So I have consistency across those two environments as far as the level of security that I'm providing. And then finally, Cloud Consume, which Jeremy touched on, right? So things such as Cloud Center, App Dynamics, and that's all, with our Cisco container platform with Kubernetes enablement, so those sorts of things. And then obviously having that strong infrastructure foundation that we as Cisco can provide. But having said that, it doesn't have to necessarily be Cisco either. You know, these are things to help our customers on-ramp into leveraging a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud environment, but it could also be on other infrastructure as well. So focusing on cloud advisory, we have a workshop that we utilize with customers to help them along their journey to hybrid cloud or multi-cloud, if you will. In that workshop, there's multiple things that go into it. First is identifying who are the key stakeholders, who are the ones that own the services that are going to be delivered end to end, right? So, you know, whether it be IT, platform, application, the business stakeholders themselves. We want to make sure that they're all involved in this workshop. And then as far as preparing for the workshop itself, you know, there's information that we would need from the customer as well. You know, what are their processes? Some customers don't even think they have, you know, that many processes in place. They, in most cases, turns out they have more than they realize. They just don't have it documented properly. You know, what tools do they use to manage their environment today? What are their skill sets of their technical resources in the company? What's their org chart look like? And an overall org chart, because you really need to see and have an idea of the various lines of business, not only just IT, but across the board, to really understand what kind of services are you delivering and who are the consumer of your services. And then any other relevant documentation that might be of value. Now, the workshop itself is 3 days in length. We have activities where we bring everybody together, as well as focus groups that split out and work on, you know, really kind of define what is trying to be achieved here with this customer. And, you know, what we're trying to get out of it is an understanding of, you know, what is working well today, what isn't working well today, right? So, you know, we really need to define that. You know, in many cases, customers don't really document that. They have an idea of what works well and what doesn't, but they haven't really put it down on paper. So really kind of define what that is. And then the objectives that they've defined, how are those objectives reached? How did they decide that? Who made that decision and why? And then how are they measuring success? What is the criteria that the customer themselves measures success by? Because we want to actually understand that so we can then carry that over into this process for them moving into this multi-cloud environment. And of course, understanding, you know, what's the maturity of their processes within IT. Again, some customers don't have their processes well documented. Others are extremely well documented. But we need to understand that as well. And then obviously from a deliverable perspective, it comes back to, you know, providing a cloud strategy document, right? So helping them understand, here's the challenges that we've identified that you have, Mr. Customer, and here's a roadmap to get to where you want to be. And an executive summary. So giving them a summary that they can then provide to their extended leadership team to brief them on the findings of this effort. And then finally, a recommendation roadmap. So where do they start? So we've done all this work. You know, we brought you in to help us. Where do we start? How do we begin this process?
Thanks, Eric. So what we'd like to expose to you is a little bit about an outcome of the workshop based on a real customer. We'll call them ACME Airlines. They are a U.S. carrier, but we'll change the names to protect the innocent. We first start by understanding what their business drivers are. And at the end of the day, they're like any other company. They need revenue growth to sustain. But being that they're in the transportation industry, they are keenly aware of their operational costs and their profit margins. Beyond that, the thing that they're looking at, the way to stand out versus their competition, is based on the customer experience. Any airline can fly a passenger from one location to another. What's the overall experience that's going to bring that customer back to ACME Airlines is of a major concern to them. One of the ways that they look at this as well to separate themselves and differentiate their business is via innovation. Now, they're not Boeing or McDonnell Douglas. They're building the aircraft, so there's very little that they can do in that aspect. But they look at IT as a key innovation silo for them to change how they're perceived by their customers, what the interaction is, et cetera. And I think one of the last drivers for them, which I think is rather unique, is that they're looking at driving employee connectivity. So they're not looking just outwardly facing, they're also looking inside the company as well. How do they improve what they're delivering service-wise via their employees? Now, ACME had some technological challenges. Obviously, ACME's like a lot of other customers. They have a lot of technical debt. They've been great purchasers from Cisco, but unfortunately, they haven't been great at deploying completely what they've acquired. So that's one of the concerns they have. The other was, being that they're we'll call it a mid-size airline, they've had to grow by acquisition. That means that they've had to acquire not only the company, but the IT assets of that company, and have to find a way to effectively integrate it into ACME's core business strategy. They also realize that whatever they do going forward in terms of a hybrid cloud approach has to effectively integrate into their existing practices, like Eric was speaking about operations, what are their run books, et cetera. And they know that's a major area of concern. Now, the real issue for ACME, I think, is their lack of IT skills in this area. They're really concerned about that. They don't have a real cloud wisdom in what they would term it to be. And then they also know that they really haven't had a real strong hand in IT governance. Their IT governance has thus been provide the capabilities, make sure there's uptime there, whatever effects come from that is fine enough. There's no measurement, reassessment. How do we get better? How do we improve? They actually use the term with us, we love your Meraki products because at the bottom of every page it says, what's your wish list item? What should we do next? So they want to embrace something like that for feedback. Now, this is ACME in terms of IT challenges. What I wanted to relate to you is another challenge from another customer of mine. This particular customer, who will remain nameless, was actually logoed on the main stage at reInvent 3 years in a row. They had a governance model, and the governance model was this for cloud. We are all in cloud. We are totally getting rid of our data centers. This was a CIO edict. 3 years, that didn't really occur. And they were into the third year, and finally, this customer happens to be fairly local to where I am. Their lead architect came in and worked with me for an hour and a half on a whiteboard, and we literally sketched out their application, their main money-making application. We stood back and said, these are all the reasons why this application cannot migrate to a public cloud instance. That was the last time they were logoed on stage at reInvent. And I think it's kind of a shame, because at the end of the day, they could benefit from some of those capabilities in the public cloud, but yet now this particular customer is in scramble mode to renew and reinvigorate the data centers that they were getting ready to shut down. So really this external focus, I think, can be a real benefit to customers. Eric?
So just to add to what Bill was saying, I have my own experience with a large insurance company. They had a cloud-first mentality. Everything was going to move to cloud, the public cloud. They quickly realized that not everything is meant to run in a public cloud environment. They came to also realize that it's not as economical as they were led to believe. Right? If I don't have the right applications, I'm spending a tremendous amount of money doing something that is actually more economical for me to run myself. So they brought some things back. They came to realize that they weren't really a all public cloud, but a cloud-first mentality. So it's a matter of anything new that we're bringing on board, let's evaluate that first for public cloud. Does it make sense to go to public cloud? If not, then we'll host it in our private cloud environment. But as they really started going along, they started realizing, is this really the right strategy? Have we really thought through this? Do we have this defined properly? And as they started thinking about that, they kind of came to the realization also that I'm not really sure that I'm identifying the right end users, the right customers for my services. So they had a real challenge, and they came to us and were asking, help us, please do this. We're really questioning what we were doing. We thought we had a good handle on this. We jumped in, we had great intentions, but it's not really working out like we thought. So with that in mind, I realize this is a busy screen. You guys probably can't see this. This is the kind of the path forward for ACME, right? These were the recommendations, and I did break this out so you could see it a little bit better. So first was, their service strategy. What are they trying to do? So it really came down to they needed to document their service architecture, and their offerings to really communicate that to not only, they they need to communicate it internally within their company, but also to their consumers, other services, to help them understand this is what we're delivering. They hadn't really done that. And then they needed to define and publish standards around these offerings. What is the expectation? What should my consumers expect, and how can those consumers then consume those services to build other things? And then defining metrics to measure the delivery of those services, right? And then obviously at the very end of the day, and even more importantly, service levels. What are my service level agreements? Do I have service level agreements for some of these services? Because if I do, that could be a major factor as far as where I place this service offering. As we know, public cloud, I'm not going to have a service level agreement from public cloud. If I need a service level agreement around this offering, I have to put it in my private cloud environment. Organization change management. This was another area of concern for ACME. They needed to really define their target vision. They hadn't done that. What was their vision? Where were they going to go, and how are they going to measure progress towards that vision? They had done none of those things. Implement comprehensive change management. They needed to have change management in place to reinforce to their own employees that we're committed to this. We have defined change management in place, a process in place of how we're going to do this, how we're going to measure it, how we're going to really gain an understanding of where we're going and why. And then build a communication strategy around it so we could also communicate that out to not only our employees but the consumers and end users of our product, our solutions. Operating model. So as many companies do, ACME had traditional siloed environment from a technology perspective. They had an individual or a group focused on storage, another individual or group focused on network, and another on compute or virtualization, right? So all their subject matter experts were very siloed. This was inefficient from a cloud perspective as far as building and providing services. So in the siloed environment, it had to go from one group to the next, to the next, to the next, to build these services. In some cases, back and forth between groups, depending on where they were in the process. It was very inefficient, so they needed to come more into a cloud model and break down those barriers. So taking their subject matter experts and having them, instead of building these processes as they go along, or these services as they go along, defining policies in advance, defining templates for these services in advance that could then be used to create the actual services. And that creation, after they've defined their policies and defined the templates, could be done by someone else. So they can focus their efforts on really aligning with the business, becoming more strategic to the business itself, and more effective and more quickly churn out new service offerings and be more agile, if you will. And this in turn that led to them needing to define a costing model, a comprehensive costing model, one that provided transparency as far as what is the overall cost of ownership for the services that I'm offering. And then metrics. They had to have metrics to understand, we talked about metrics in the other slide, but these metrics are for understanding the health of the platform, the health of the service. What's the utilization, what's the performance that's taking place on each of these service offerings. I need to have metrics in place to help measure that. If I don't have those defined, then how do I know? And then ultimately, this leads back to the very first point I made, evolving roles. So now my subject matter experts, their roles have now evolved to the point where they're working up front to define policies, right? They're defining those policies, they're defining those templates, but they're not actually utilizing to create the service. That's happening on the back end. They're now more strategic and working on the front end, doing new things that help provide impact to the business itself. Let me get to the next.
Thanks, Eric. So the one unique thing for ACME was literally changing the way that they viewed what they were providing from an IT perspective. They literally changed their nomenclature into providing services in that environment. It's no longer an application, it's no longer infrastructure, it literally is a service. What they had to do though, I'm going to speak quite a bit about governance here, they literally had to define that service owner. Who is that going to be that was going to drive the service, ensure that it's measured properly, that there's input and feedback coming in to help evolve that service and capability to really make it impactful.
Is it typical that you have problems finding service owners?
That is a great question. there's usually someone in the organization that is passionate about what that service provides. It doesn't even have to be an IT person. That can be the service owner at that point. But to that end, that service owner has to have a good idea of process and how it works, and have that working relationship with IT if they're outside of IT, right? So you'll notice also that automation, as I mentioned before, was a big function for ACME and for other customers as well. And that is that automation gives them the agility to work, but that in essence changed the way IT approached what they provided in that environment. So not only how do they burn off the technical debt, but how do they turn that into a windfall for the overall business? And they looked at automation as a way to achieve that. Now, in terms of technology, building out the roadmaps and future visions and things like that are all important because, as Eric was speaking, people's roles are going to change. That's inevitable. They need to know that the change they're making is in line with the business vision, with the IT vision, and that they see that they can grow themselves and improve their capabilities, their skill sets, et cetera. Most customers, and ACME is no exception here, they started with an IaaS service. It's the simplest thing. It's an easy win. It's how do we change the infrastructure we've got, make it more nimble, more accessible, and more consumable to whomever may need or want to consume it. On the flip side of that, though, as Eric mentioned in terms of process, they really had to embrace ITSM models and ITOM models. What ACME had in place wasn't effective and wouldn't be effective going forward. So they've had to adjust that capability, and they're addressing that as part of their overall roadmap. In terms of what is the vision, the roadmap, we talked about, cloud native applications. So when we speak to multi-cloud, even with ACME, it wasn't about what they're building. It's also about what they are consuming and reflecting back as a service to the consumers. So how does ACME score? This is one of the things we look at in terms of the overall workshop. One of the outputs is in terms of different domains. So across the top, you see on the left-hand side from ad hoc all the way out to optimize. So how do they score in those different buckets? And you'll see ACME for overall transportation is actually in a good place. They've got a little bit of a competitive edge in their cloud strategy, a little bit in their cloud adoption to date. Their overall strategy is lacking a little bit in terms of their peers, not just in transportation, but in, this overall transportation was in airlines specifically. The cloud strategy overall was larger transportation. Applications-wise, again, they were early adopters in looking at how they use the interface with the customer to differentiate. So they had a lot of those assets already out inside the public cloud. Different services. Risk and mitigation is an area where, by their own admission, they said, we need help. We don't know what's exposed. We don't know how to control it. Help us, Cisco. And then finally, in terms of overall multi-cloud environment and looking at it as a true multi-cloud as opposed to this is our private infrastructure, that's our public consumption, they need to actually blend those effectively. They had a lot of work to do. Eric?
Thank you. So at the end, we finally delivered this capability roadmap to ACME to help them. Where do they start? I mentioned that before. Where do we start? How do we start, Cisco? What is the first thing that we should be doing and moving towards what we've now defined as our vision? Now, this roadmap, if you will, you see the timelines here. You see, the starting points. For ACME, it was hyper-converged. That's not the same for every customer. I want to be clear. It's not. This isn't a cookie cutter. It's going to vary by customer. Some customers, instead of hyper-converged, it could be. And Bill mentioned this with another customer. Maybe we need to just figure out how do I automate my infrastructure, the existing infrastructure. I'm not looking to establish something new. I already feel like I have the pieces in place. I just need to learn how to automate it. Or it could be, I'm already this far down the road, Cisco, maybe I need to learn how do I manage these multi-cloud environments so I could provide this consolidated view into the services I'm offering to my end users instead of them individually going off to AWS or Azure or Google or whomever it may be on their own. I'm able to bring that all in, provide some governance around it, get visibility into what's happening. So, it all depends on where the customer's at within their journey, and it varies from customer to customer.
The only thing I would add to that, Eric, is I think it's very telling. If you look on the timeline, they're not serial in nature. A lot of parallel efforts going on here, so it's multiple teams coming together to work and provide an outcome. And if you look at the overall timeline, it's less than 12 months. That's some amazing transformation.
Absolutely.
So the customer really has to be willing and bought into the overall process. I think the real key there is the measurable outcomes that were defined by the customer.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Thank you, Bill.
Thanks.
Oh.
So from a capabilities aspect, again, we're just going to focus on one area, and that was to build and manage their hybrid cloud environment using that approach. The big one for them, as we mentioned, was security, risk, and mitigation. How do they deal with what they have today and what may come in the future? Are they flexible enough, yet overall controlled in terms of security and visibility? This is one of the things that not only ACME, but a lot of customers are very concerned with when you start using the word cloud, whether it's public, hybrid, private, doesn't matter. Looking at secure connectivity, ACME had some of it because obviously they had a cloud presence, but they wanted to make sure that it was optimized and that in the event they decided to change cloud providers, they could do it easily without major disruption to their operational processes. Things like threat detection, et cetera, they know that the bad actors are out there. They're just not sure where or when they're going to strike. So they wanted to make sure that the capabilities that they had on their on-prem infrastructure was accurately reflected again in what assets they had inside the public cloud. And they could do it in an asynchronous or a synced motion, if you will. And finally, in terms of cloud consume, they were really looking at things like orchestration in that environment. Again, mitigating their tool sets so they can be more effective. It's one thing to burn down technical debt of physical infrastructure. It's another to look at the technical debt of software that helps run that environment. And even in terms of looking at the operational software in that environment as well. So lastly, here's ACME, flying high, looking good, because they embraced external advice from Cisco. We'd love it if it was a Cisco engagement with every customer. It might not be. But for customers to be successful, they can't just go it on their own. At the end of the day, ACME Airlines is realizing success now and will, within the next 12 months, be able to accelerate that success. And without understanding not only the customer's business and technical goals and where they stand currently, cloud is precarious. There is no doubt about it. It's a very interesting place to be. And then finally, you might not be used to hearing this from Cisco, but technology alone will not solve the customer's issues.
So this offering, is this something that Cisco Advanced comes in and does all this consultation, or is there like a partner enablement program so Cisco partners can deliver similar services around cloud migrations? What does this translate into as far as how Cisco and or people that work with Cisco do what you just said?
So in a word, yes. So there's Cisco Advanced Services. There is a partner program as well, so we can reach a broader audience. And we're doing our own internal education with Cisco to make sure that our interactions with our customers when we're talking about multi-cloud takes this approach as well.
Gotcha.